Hello, this is a video just to introduce you to managing Ontario's forest, so you have an idea of who's in charge of what and just to get used to some of the lingo. Along the way, I do have on the resources page a glossary of acronyms that are used in Ontario, and that may provide you some assistance as we add more acronyms to the list as we continue on. So first of all, before we dive right into it, we should be made well aware of who's in charge of what in regards to governments. And a lot of you may not be familiar how governments work, but there are three levels of governments in this province. We have the federal level, we have the provincial level, and then we have the municipal level. And each one has a different function in regards to operating inside the province. First of all, the federal government is in charge of foreign affairs, trade, immigration, criminal justice, defense, and nothing much to do with forestry. The only way that the federal government gets involved with the forestry is in research. For example, at the Sioux up north, there's a research station there, and then there's one, I believe, in Edmonton, one in Fredericton, and one somewhere in BC. But their key focus is one of research, and as you will see in the next point I make, is nothing in their jurisdiction. At the provincial level, what is the province responsible for? Your education, your health, social services, and environment and natural resources. So this is the key player, really, is the province. They're the ones who are in charge of natural resources. And then what is the municipal government responsible for? Well, let me see if I can just move this up slightly. There we go. I'm just going to, there we go. So what the municipal government is for, okay, the municipal government is for local public services, social, recreational, police, fire, and in our case, in the city of Kawartha Lakes, they actually have their own 10,000 acre forest, but that's more of a rarity. But really, the big player when it comes to forestry as a natural resource in any province across this country is the province. So let's start hearing how do they organize themselves in this province. Before we dive into the whole concept of the structure of forestry, you have to understand that, like, what is our forest made out of, and then 65% of it, of the forest, is actually has trees on it, and that's on crown land, has trees. And these are provided by the M&R, these slides, by the way. On that crown land, a whopping 18% you can say is water, 10.7% is wetland, and so we have in total, we have in Ontario 107 million hectares of land. So there's a lot of land. Now in Ontario, like I've said before, the forest is broken up into these units, and we'll be talking about these later in more detail, but as you can see, there's Algonquin Park, just to give you some perspective. Okay, there's Algonquin Park, and you guys had fall camp, you were right there. That's where you guys were. Okay, and So it's all broken out from Cochrane all the way over to Thunder Bay area. It's all into different forest management units. And that is operated by the responsibility of the provincial government. Now, we might as well look at one as an example, and this one is called the French Severn Forest. And just to back up here, the French Severn Forest, so you know where it's located, is right there. And the chairman of our Forestry Advisory Committee, who is a grad from here, he's the fellow who's responsible for managing all of that forest. And we're just going to look at that forest now, and just to give you an example of one of these units. So Steve Monroe, who's in charge of this, is in charge of the French Severn Forest management area, and what he's responsible for is 2.1 million acres of land. And it's a very interesting area because this large area that he is responsible for has private land mixed in, cottage land, native issues, and crown land also, of course, in there, which is the 2.1 million acres. So the big challenge is to effectively manage that on a sustainable basis. Now we'll take a look at that in a little closer detail. So now you can see here is that the Westwind Forest Stewardship Incorporated is responsible for this area. Now you're going, what are you looking at? Is that the green, what you're seeing is two different things, is the old system and the new system. And what you're seeing here is the tile numbers like you're used to, like GIS, is the purple, and the green is the old townships that existed there. So this area here, as you can see, is very complex, and that's typically the way it is with a lot of these forest areas. There's lots of variety and issues to deal with. And these maps are directly from Westwind Forest Stewardship, which there will be a link on your resource page to this website. Oops, went too fast. Now, the way it works is that the forest, for forest management, the sustainable forest license is a 20-year perpetual license. In other words, it's independently audited every 5 years, and the licensee must prepare and comply with, and actually it's a 10-year forest management plan now, not a 5-year. So that's just been changed to reduce the amount of paperwork. And so the result is that forest management plans, which are a legal requirement under the Crown Forest Sustainability Act, which will also be a resource on your page, on your resource page, have to be approved by the government. So people must abide by this. And so a forest management plan is made, which lasts for 20 years, but is renewed every 10 years. Now, before we, what I'd like to do is just discuss what goes on with these plans. Forest companies like Westwind play an important role because they have to make incredibly detailed plans for the management plan and for the day-to-day operations and activities. And if you remember at fall camp, even that operational road had to be planned well in advance before a bulldozer even came close to it. So what do the forest managers have to do? What's their job? Well, first of all, they have to ensure that the forest is healthy for the future. It isn't good enough just making a logging plan. You have to ensure that it's good for the future. That means understanding silviculture, forest dynamics, ecology, and understanding ecosites. You have to be able to realize benefits from our forests, such as timber and wildlife habitat. Those are both things those are both benefits, timber and wildlife habitat. So it becomes interesting. This is why you folks are doing that wildlife habitat suitability. It ties directly into this line right here. And that's what the Ontario Landscape Tool, which is based on wildlife habitat suitability, that's what its purpose is. Then the forest manager must plan for what type of activities do they allow. For example, some type of harvesting, extraction approaches may not be allowed, or their timing may be not permitted in some scenarios, for i.e. recreational concerns. For example, there could be a remote lodge or wildlife issues. How to avoid long-term damage from forest operations. And that means the forest managers, let's get a simple example is, again, let's use the shallow soil, that if shallow soils are identified, then they need to be protected such that no long-term damage is created where trees will take a long time to reestablish barren rock. So, besides being able to conduct activities, one of the important things is, here's another buzzword that you need to know, is values. That every forest management plan must identify values. And values, what that means is things that you want to protect or really watch out for. Like, for example, we've talked about old growth forests, particular fish and wildlife habitat, and based on, you've seen in the wildlife suitability matrix that some wildlife habitat is more rare than others. And then Aboriginal issues, for example, very simple one, native pictographs, burial grounds, so on. In some areas, summer cottages is a very important thing if they are located near Crown land. Trap lines, that's somebody who's making an income, certainly need to work with them. Trails and trail systems are becoming bigger and bigger issues. I know when I write plans for down here for municipal land, it is a huge issue. Skidoo trails, equestrian, horseback riding, motocross, mountain biking, birding, it goes on, and trail systems are a huge issue when it comes to forestry, forest management. I would say, from my experience, it's almost number one issue, especially the more closer you are to a urban population. So other values, as determined by input by the public, have to be recognized, and local citizens and planning teams. So it gets to be really interesting, and then we're going to talk about the people who will get involved in all this. So a forest management plan is it something you have to do on an ongoing basis. Now it's for 10 years. But the key thing is that you must get public consultation, and then you must have local citizen committees, and I'll explain those in a minute. So in other words, you just can't have somebody with some ideas, like say a forester or a small group, and then they whip up a plan. The public must be involved. That means you and I, we own the land, not them. And they are allowed to use it, but we own it and we want to protect it. And we want to take, and generally it's not an issue, but it's something to remember, that the land belongs to us. Now, who does all this work? Well, the people who are going to do the work on the land lead the operation, and but they are industry and government as part of the planning team. What do they talk about in these plans? Well, they talk about where they're going to harvest. It isn't just about harvest, but where they're going to have renewal, and where are they going to access the forest, in other words, build more roads, and what are the values that need to be protected along the way. So there's a lot of things we discussed, and along the way you have to determine the AAC, and then you know that from earlier lectures, the annual allowable cut for each one of these 10-year plans. Now, one of the things I said was an LCC. There is another acronym for you, an LCC. And this is the Perry Sound LCC for the forest that's near the between Algonquin Park and Georgian Bay. So as you can see here, this is just an example of the people who were involved. And this may be a bit dated, but we have the municipalities involved, we have tourism involved, and these are local citizen committee, are people who are going to have their say, and they usually represent an organization in that area where the companies are planning to do forest extraction. This Randy Clark guy, he's in charge he's in regards to mining and tourism. The naturalists are there, anglers and hunters. Medium-sized logging companies want to know what's going on. Labor, people who are maybe potential representing employment people. The native, this is a Kawagamog Lake Association. Whenever you hear Lake Association, that's code name for cottage group. And usually they organize themselves around a lake. So whatever the lake is, they band together. Then we have the First Nation representative. Large logging companies, we have snowmobilers located, we have the trap line people, the Ontario fur managers, independent small loggers, and we have probably remote tourism. So you can see what a mix of people from that area which are getting involved to create and help guide us to an effective public plan. Very, very excellent. So just to give you an idea, I'm going to see if I can zoom this in. This is part of a plan for the stewardship, the Westwind, and I'm going to see if I can. And so you can see here, this area is proposed. And you're going next semester. You folks are going to be writing a management plan and creating an annual work schedule, which is the AWS, another acronym. And this is an example. The yellow is the permitted areas to be cut, and then the pink are buffers. For an example, right here, this is a heronry buffer. This is during the breeding season. They have to stay away at least 1 kilometer, and then when there's not a breeding season, they are allowed to do some logging up to this perimeter here. So it's a very detailed map, and next semester in Dave's class you're going to get extensive experience creating these in ArcMap. Okay, I'm just going to back out. Okay. One of the things that's written right into all forest management plans is we must incorporate the Aboriginal peoples. And what that means is we have to, and rightly so, provide for Crown access to the land and their right to hunt and fish for personal consumption. And just remember, the terms rights and privileges is very important in this province. If you are non-Aboriginal, you have a privilege to hunt. If you are Aboriginal, you have a right to hunt. And that is a very important difference in respect to a point of law. Okay, and in regards to Aboriginal people, it encourages First Nations involvement in the process of developing management plan, because it's recognized that the Native community, that 80% of the Native community is close or resides right in one of the forest management areas, and they would have direct benefit for employment. So it always is to incorporate that community into any planning. Now, before the forest management units, when you allow a company to work to use the area, they must be licensed under the Crown Forest Sustainability Act. If it's through timber, can be accessed through the Forest Resource License, and these are small licenses where a company like Westwind would organize multiple, if not 20, 30 different small loggers, jobbers, and each one of those individuals would have a forest resource license to work in that particular forest management area, forest management unit. And then they pay part of their fees, stumpage, which I'll get into, to support the planning process. In larger companies, what they have is sustainable forest licenses, and these sustainable forest licenses, SFLs, usually are directly linked to a forest management unit. And the important thing is that the SFLs holder have to do everything, all right? So they do the forest management planning and the operations and the monitoring of their work. So they are running the entire show. Now, harvest and renewal statistics, just to give you an idea, again, they come and go. They're generally, just to get an idea, just remember 200,000 hectares are harvested typically in a year. Now it's actually it's a fair bit less because of the slowdown with the United States, but that represents roughly around 22 million meters cubed per year are harvested on Crown land. How much of that, what does that mean in regards to how much are we cutting? We're cutting less than 1/4% of the total forest area. Very little. And any areas that we do harvest must be renewed to government standards. Remember, renewed doesn't mean planted. It could mean aerial seeded, natural regen, whatever the case may be. And that's what's pointed out here. So, just for the sake of it, how many trees do we actually plant? 130 million tree seedlings are planted annually. And that represents 22,000 hectares. So the good portion of it is naturally seeded and natural regen. Now, one of the terms you should learn is, along the way, is every province has this, and it's called stumpage or crown charges. And stumpage has nothing to do with a stump. It's a great question on a quiz. What is stumpage? It's not the age of a stump, and it's nothing. What it means is, for the amount of volume you remove from the forest, you will have to pay the government. The companies have to pay the government a certain amount for the right to remove our trees from our land. And this is called revenue, crown, all these crown charges. And you can look up the definition on the glossary. And where does the money go? In the past, the money used to go to one big pot, and then what happened was the government would use it for roads and schools, all kinds of important things, but very little came back for reforestation. Then things got changed, and now the money is divided up, and we have the Forest Renewal Trust Fund, where a good $100 million annually goes to help reforest and then to pay for the work that's done in greenhouses for getting our trees ready to be put back into the forest. The next one is the Consolidated Revenue Fund, of Ontario, and this is for roads and hospitals and schools. So that's where that money goes, and then we have a little special pot of money where it's for Future Forest Trust Fund, and that's a special fund to encourage companies and other individuals to find ways to make our forests more disease and fire and insect resistant and grow trees faster. So that's how the money is split up. But generally the key thing for us to know is that there's a portion of money that comes back to the Forest Renewal Trust Fund to ensure that we have forests forever through our Crown charges. So where does harvesting not occur in Ontario? Well, it doesn't occur in parks and conservation reserves, and that represents 9% of the province. And then, so what percentage of the area is actually being managed for forestry? About 12%. And what is considered inaccessible, inoperable, and other reserves, in other words, just is about 20% of the province. So there you go, about 12% is actually managed for forest extraction. In Ontario, we have some legislations, and I'm just going to touch on a few. There is a mountain of legislation. I'm just going to touch on some of the key ones. The number one piece of legislation in Ontario is called the Crown Forest Sustainability Act. This is a very important act, and it is in your resources page, and we're going to have you read a summary version of that. It provides the rules of how do we prepare plans, how do we license land, how do we protect our forests for the future. The other important piece of document is the Environmental Assessment Act, and underneath it there's a section on the timber class environmental assessment and approval. And then we have the Forestry Act, which that's for agreement and private land, for private land. For example, MIF tips and things like that, they go under the Forestry Act. So the Crown Forest Sustainability Act, again, what it's all about. Key thing is that it includes provisions for management planning, what information is required, for example, for scaling and such. It talks about forest resources, that they're sustainable, and then who's allowed to use them. You just can't set up a pulp mill and say, hey, I'm going to now need some wood from the government. You have to get approval to set up any kind of a facility that is going to require wood from public lands. Yeah, and then there's the whole process of how do we allow people on our public land, and in regards to forest operations, in regards to compliance. You guys have just recently done a compliance report on a forestry operation. And then what do we do when it's not done properly? And how does funding for forest renewal occur through our stumpage agreements? Under the Crown Forest Sustainability Act, there are a number of manuals, and some of them are pretty hefty. There's the Forest Management Planning Manual, the Forest Operations and Silviculture Manual, and that includes 41 guidelines. And then there's Timber Scaling and Forest Information, which is the Site and Criteria Manual that is used for, and you guys will be using that next semester. The Environmental Assessment Act. What is the purpose? Well, in a nutshell, is to protect our forests and have wise management. And then what it does is it provides a systematic way to make sure the projects that are done and the plans are done maintain our forests. we won't be spending a lot of time with that one. We're just going to focus pretty well on Crown Forest Sustainability Act and the Forestry Act. That's the two key ones we're going to deal with. There's so many other ones. Aggregate Act, Waterways Act, and it goes on and on. Next semester we'll get into more of them. So this is the one that addresses private lands, the Forestry Act, and the key thing here is that it encourages management through incentives, managed forest tax incentive program. Now, besides creating plans, one of the big things that are done that are required for a forest management plan is assessment. And what we want to know is, what we do, even though we think we're doing well, is it having a positive? Are we not impacting the environment in a negative way? So we need to collect data. And so what is it really, in a nutshell, really, is used to improve forest management practices. That's one of the most crucial things we want to do, is improve forest management practices. So the other one is auditing and reporting. And this is really important. We want to make sure that, and for example, every year, and this is a little dated, this one here right now, but the Ontario State of the Forest Report, and this will be one of your resources on your site that I'd like you to go through, and it talks about where are we at with forestry in our province, and this audit is done once every 5 years. And I'll get the latest one for you guys online. Okay, so it's a checklist. It's like when a accountant checks out a company. Well, it's the same deal, except for a forest. Thanks so much. Halloween must be coming close.